Hello, Reckon. It's me, Sydney Batten again, back with another installment of Origin Story Reckon Creates. Today we'll be with the Bitter Socialite Trace Barnett. He's like a culinary and Southern lifestyle genius. He's on Good Day Alabama. He's on Talk of Alabama. He wrote a book called Tracin Roots, and he's going to be teaching us canning and food preservation. Trace, hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, are you there?
Yes. And we're
Good.
live.
You know, the service is a little bit spotty. We're out here in my garden right now, which here, let's step out here and see. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You know, it's not like we had 15 minutes of prep time before this that we didn't lose each other, but you know, right when it starts, that's when it happens.
What do you have in your basket there? Okra?
Are you there? Yeah, so I have been out. If you can tell that I'm probably glistening a little bit, and that's because I've been out picking this morning, and I picked some yesterday too. I just picked some green beans and some okra, so all my okra is starting to come in. It's that time of year where it seems like everything in my garden comes in at once. So all the tomatoes are coming in, squash, zucchini, purple whole peas, jalapenos, all kinds of peppers, eggplants. I just picked the most beautiful white eggplant this morning. We'll take a look at that in my kitchen if we get to it. But it seems like everything's coming in directly at the same time. And I know a lot of gardeners, feel the same way too. And that's why canning and preserving all of the produce you can is so important. I think, it's a time-honored tradition. And it's also something that just makes you feel good. It's so comforting, especially now if we're stuck in at home. It's a good hobby. It's great to get the kids involved. And that's actually how I started out too. When I was a little kid, just barely big enough to get on a stool. My grandmother, the very first recipe I learned to make was blackberry jam. And so I've been making that blackberry jam ever since. Do you hear the dogs in the background too?
No.
I can't hear her at all. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, my neighbor is a dog trainer. So if we hear some dogs in the background, he trains duck dogs. So, pretty cool. We live out here in the country. So
I know.
we're out here in my flower garden right now. So I moved back. I lived in East Hampton after I graduated from college, and I was in my degrees in food science and human nutrition. I was more on the hospitality event planning side, and lived in East Hampton. I started the Bitter Socialite while I was there. You're going to have to excuse the glisteningness. It is a little bit warm here in Alabama at the moment. And when I moved back in 2016, I renovated a barn and turned it into my house. So the barn had quite a life. It had been everything from a chicken house, to a barn, to a fabric warehouse, to a fabric store. And when I moved back, it was completely filled to the brim with anything, everything you could ever imagine. But one of my favorite things about my house, and this may arguably be like my favorite place on earth, and it is in my garden. And when I first started this garden here, I have 3 separate gardens, and they all kind of came out of necessity. So when I first started this garden, and as you can see, that's what I really want to stress to and talk about it in Tracin Roots. And I know a lot of the Reckon viewers and who will be joining us in the canning class, people think that you have to have this like in completely small places, even on your in your containers on your porch. And I originally built these 6 beds, and what I wanted these beds to be is I wanted them to contain herbs, flowers, and vegetables. And that's still how I garden very much. So I garden just like I decorate in my house, which is more is always better. But what happened in this flower garden is all the flowers just completely overtook the vegetables. So now this is just like cutting garden. I do have a variety of herbs that grow in here. These sago palms are some of my favorites, and a friend of mine who passed away gave me these sago palms. They're like 35 years old, and I do grow a wide variety of things. So this is a full pollinator garden, so I'm a beekeeper. I didn't know if you knew that. I captured a couple of new swarms this year. We'll say hello to them when we go out into that side. But this is a full pollinator garden back here, so there's all kinds of, there's liatris and rutabaga and coneflower. Of course, plenty of cannas. I love zinnias and foxgloves. And what's great about pollinator garden too is most of the things that we eat or want to eat is also very, very lucrative for pollinators too. I'm going to show you this plant here. Sydney, can you see this plant okay?
Yes.
This plant here that has the strange berries.
Okay, yes.
So that That is a poke salad plant.
Oh,
And all of those old Southerners out there. So it's a weed. It grows. Yeah, it grows native. They are pretty invasive. I keep them pulled out here, but I let them grow because they're kind of an ode to the Appalachian tradition there. You can take the leaves off. You have to parboil them several times. If I would suggest that if you haven't cooked it at home before, maybe leave that. We won't be canning any poke salad that day, that's for sure. But
great.
I love the kind of textures. I love the heights. And that's what I try to play into my vegetable garden as well.
Is poke salad
Can you hear me?
poisonous if you don't boil it? I hope that's getting through.
Say that one more time.
Is poke salad poisonous if you don't boil
it is poisonous. So if you don't, it is. So if you don't parboil it like 3 different times before, it is poisonous. And it's always one of those things. And I guess that's how the Southern gardener, especially the Appalachian gardener, I guess that's really it was out of necessity that these gardens were planted. They always wonder, like, who was the first person that decided to take poke salad and cook it up, and who came up with the recipe to know that parboil it 3 times and you won't be poisoned. And I prepare it this way as well. You take the parboiled poke salad, and it's almost just like a spinach. Has almost like a taste of between like a chard and a kale. But you take it and you scramble it with eggs, and that's how I've always had poke salad. So it's very interesting. We have a lot of recipes. We're in a unique region of Alabama in that we have a lot of Appalachian flair. And I didn't really know until I did the book and started doing TV and all of that. That a lot of people don't. A lot of the recipes that we cook here, and a lot of the things that we grow too, are very unique. And a lot of people are like, goose feed, for instance, is one of those dishes. Have you goose feed before?
No.
Well, it's actually like tender spring greens, like mustard, kale, small spinach. It's like lettuces. And what you do, dandelion greens even, and you take the poke salad, I'm still on that, and you take the fresh greens and you mix those up into salad. You add in like green onions, scallions, all of that. And then, of course, like in any Southerner would, what you use for a dressing is just plain old bacon grease, hot bacon grease. Pour that over your goose feed, and it makes this wonderful salad that, when I make it here at home, I crumble bacon on top, and it's so good.
I feel like you could make that a lot better than I could.
Let's walk around in my garden. It's one of those things. Throw your own spin on it. I can barely hear you, so we'll walk around my garden a little bit, and I'll talk about that too. And then we'll go out to the vegetable gardens, and then we'll talk about some canning for our class. Like I said, there's a mix of of course, Murphy's on cue back there. Don't look back there right now. He's doing something he should not be doing on TV. So like I said, I love a mixture of plants here. He's always on cue, always wants in the so a mixture of herbs and vegetables. I still do that in these gardens back here. And like this corn is so cool. Like we were talking about earlier, is people think you have to have like a large expansive space to really grow and harvest from your garden and utilize it. This is actually a container corn. My friends over at Burpee Seeds, they have a container corn. And what's so cool about this is this corn will produce complete full-size ears of corn, except it's only in small form. And when you plant that on your porch, so say you're going to have a container corn, you need to plant those in a grouping of 3. And what they do is they'll cross-pollinate each other. But I love to throw these in, say, flower beds. Not only is it a good visual appeal, it gives you some height, but it's also just a little adorable baby corn. And people walk around my garden, they're like, is that corn growing in there? And yes, it is. And like so, you're not supposed to let your dill go to bloom if you want to, have your dill throughout the rest of the year. But I allow it to go to bloom because it really just wanted to. But I love adding in those like tall blooming herbs into my garden because I really think, they're just wispy. They billow in the wind. And again, pollinator loves those as well. And, that's one thing that I would suggest to gardeners too is if you are planting a garden, whether it's to can or preserve or just feed your family throughout the season, throw in a lot of these other pollinator plants because what that's going to do, it's going to bring in pollinators to, I tell you, I'm just sweating it up out here. Let me get my little handkerchief out there. Another tip, if you're a gardener, is soak these in astringent like sea breeze and tie it around your neck, and it will keep you cool while you're working out here. So, and it also keep mosquitoes away. This is a cool plant here. Are we still connected good?
Yeah, y'all are good.
So this is a cool plant
I know we're on
here.
a little delay, but
So
sounds
this
great.
plant I love. And so are you a fennel? Do you like fennel at all, Sydney? Because if you do, know that it is so easy to grow from seed, and it looks perfect when it's planted along with flowers. And if you'll come in, Carol, Cocktail Carol is filming us today. She hasn't had a cocktail yet, so her filming should be pretty good. But look down in there, and you can see the fennel bulb start to kind of thicken up there. And one of my favorite recipes, the recipe's in the book too, one of my favorite things to do with fennel is take the fennel and slice it up, and you can roast that with any kind of summer vegetable that you want. I roast them with everything from squash to zucchini. I even roast them like around Thanksgiving with Brussels sprouts and citrus, and it's so wonderful. And they have this like good wispy texture to them too. And a lot of people ask me when they're in my garden, everyone's always like, what is this? So these are alliums. They are in the garlic and onion family, and they bloom kind of out of nowhere. They shoot up out of the ground, and they're beautiful and purple in spring. But as the year goes, they have these like wonderful green balls, and I love those as a texture thing too. But what's also cool about this is I've stripped the leaves off the stem at the moment because they're not like a hot weather lover. But what's so great about that too is you can rip off the leaves, and I use them in cheese boards. I use them as a subtle like seasoning. They have just a mild like onion flavor to them, and I use them to like season up soups and stews and stocks and all things like that too. Come here and check out my big foot. As you can see here too, I have squash just kind of like overflowing everywhere. When we go out here to my vegetable garden, there's a spot out there that I'll show you. Um, that squash is one of those things that I kind of plant periodically throughout the year. So I'll start off having, a few squash plants in my garden beds, and then I kind of will stick them in other places throughout the year, because what squash does, come on out here, we'll show you this, hold the squash thought. So I have that thing where I jump around, try and have a conversation with me, and I jump to a million different subjects. So this is made this trail. So this is a loofah, and I grow these every year. I actually was doing a canning class for the Country Living Fair up in Tennessee, and there was the sweetest lady. She was probably about 90 years old, and she came up to me and she was like, I have some seeds that I think you're going to want. And I said, oh, really? And so gave her my address. And so she sent me loofah seeds. And loofah is in the cucumber family, but they are the spongy um, dishwater. I use them for everything. So they are good for baths, they're good for dishwater. But what they do is, this is early in the season. They're a gorgeous plant. They have a huge bloom on them, which is about this big, which is really cool. Again, the honeybees and all sorts of pollinators love them. But as the year progresses, so you will have these long cucumbery looking kind of fruit that comes off of them. And apparently you can eat those. A lot of Asian cuisine, they utilize the loofah, but I have not yet. So we'll have to do that next time. But what they do is, some of them are even this long, and then they turn brown on the stem. Harvest those, and you soak them in a little bit of water, and then you peel the skin off, and it reveals the loofah sponge that we use in our baths and our dishwater. And they're great because not only do they come directly out of the garden, but they don't hold bacteria, and they also hold no smell, which is so cool. It's amazing how plants really can do that. And I have a lone cabbage over here. This is my favorite little corner of my garden. I always think like that's the perfect shot right there. I love this gorgeous purple cabbage along with this little fern here. This is one of our little native invasive ferns. I'll throw these invasive things in and let them just go crazy in this flower garden here, and then I'll complain about it, next year. So remind me of that when I do. So this is all new back here. This is all new. So this has been our project for this year. And this garden, this is one of my new swarms of bees here. When did we catch the swarm, Carol?
6 weeks ago.
It was, yeah, roughly. But that was right 6 weeks ago. And they kind of came out of nowhere. There's been 4 swarms that came through this year. And so I was really limited on my beekeeping supplies, like the pitched roof that I have on the ones out front. So they got, their lodgings are a little bit not as beautiful, but we've got a new top ordered. But this is my new project for the year, and these are all my new vegetable beds and a greenhouse. We'll go in my greenhouse too. Definitely don't have to have a greenhouse to start vegetables indoors. So these are my tomatoes over here, and I started all of these tomatoes by seed. And, if you're interested in canning and growing and harvesting, then I'm sure you're interested in starting your own seeds too. And one of my things, it's one of my biggest tips, like the gardeners and folks who are really kind of getting started in gardening, is start what you can by seed. Because even if you only have, 3 to 5 plants that actually mature, the price point is so low. And tomatoes are the easiest thing. So what I do is I'll take eggshells. I save all the eggshells and I feed them either back to the chickens or I use them to start seeds. And what I do is I put a little bit of seed starter mix in there and put my tomato seeds. Tomato seeds are tiny little things. And what that does is it gives me a little individual container. Of course, it's sustainable too. And when I get ready to pop those up, I just simply take the eggshell, crush it a little bit with my hand, and then you're able to transfer that to another pot, and it kind of feeds them that good calcium richness that they want. And there's a variety of tomatoes. Come on, slide in here, Carol, if you can. This is my new pride and joy here. This is an espalier apple tree, and I have a bamboo form that's going to go behind it, so it'll keep it kind of growing in the armed texture. I'd always wanted an espalier apple tree, and so just got one this year. So that's been one of my COVID projects. But slide in here, Carol. Let's show some tomatoes, because we'll definitely be talking about canning tomatoes in a canning class. And when I can tomatoes, I use a variety of tomatoes in, whether I'm making a sauce, a Bloody Mary mix, or just canning them in general to use as soups later. I love to use a mix. And we have these little fun, these are called Tasty Wee tomatoes. And they're little small, almost like Tommy Toe tomatoes. I love to use those and can those up, because what they are is they are incredibly sweet. So you don't have to add in a little pinch of sugar. They have a really good flavor that completely carries over. Also grow like Cherokee purples. I've harvested them all this morning. There's one in there that we need to get. And then I grow like a variety of pear tomatoes, Roma tomatoes, and I kind of keep all of my tomatoes. I mean, the size of this bed, I think these beds are 4 foot by 6 foot. So if you had this in a backyard, you could totally do one huge thing of tomatoes. I always usually plant my tomatoes in a row or section or a bed together. And the reason I do that is because it kind of keeps, I don't know, it keeps out pests. I can keep a look at them. You don't have to worry about, having to go check for the big caterpillars. I mean, if there's a tomato worm on this, it will eat the whole thing in a day. So it really helps. And then if you have a blight or anything that you need to fertilize or spray for, you can totally kind of take care of those in one of their own big beds. Over here, we'll get back to our squash point.
We have one quick question from the audience. Is it harder
Yeah, of
to
course.
grow heirloom? Is it harder to grow heirloom plants than it is non-heirloom plants?
100%. And the reason it's harder is because, so heirloom plants are not bred in a way where they are genetically resistant to blights or root rot or certain pests. So naturally, they come in needing a little bit of more tender loving care. But I will say that the key to growing heirlooms, rather than sticking in like one of which Better Boy tomatoes are great, but they've been kind of genome to where they're resistant to a lot of things. But the only thing about growing heirloom tomatoes, it is a little bit harder. But if you grow them like in a small contained environment like this, give them the tender loving care that they need. Be sure and fertilize those well with bone meal. I always use a lot of bone meal when I'm in my tomato beds, and they should do well for you. One thing I always say, like with tomato pests too, is you can mix up a solution of just a little bit of Dawn dish detergent and warm water. And so if I start seeing like a blight coming onto my tomatoes, what I'll do is I'll take that solution and I'll just spray that on it. And it always seems to work for me. Another thing with heirloom varieties, and I'll show you in here too, is a lot of people are always wondering, like, what am I doing wrong? I have all of these, yellowy kind of dying limbs. That's perfectly okay. What do you want to do though is when you see those, this happens a lot of times when they go to fruit, because they are really putting a lot of energy into creating these tomatoes for you. So what they do is if you have all these other branches, they'll start to kill those off. And of course, just like anything, especially in Alabama, when summer rolls around, you just kind of start to get tired and melt. But to simply pluck those off, and what that's going to do is that will send all that good energy on into your vines and to your tomatoes. And this is my squash bed here. I've got a ton more squash out in the big garden. We'll go look at that. But what I was saying in the garden in here is I usually keep, this was all full of squash, and I rotate my squash crops, which squash, let me tell you, are the easiest things to can. And I think they are wonderful. I even can zucchini. And one reason I love to can the zucchini is because you can make like zucchini bread with it. But when I can, people are always like, how do you fry canned squash? Well, I love to do like the little squash croquettes. So you almost make like the little the squash patties, and you can add in
Ooh.
all kinds of herbs to that. And you can like top that with like a beurre blanc, and then, you know, like a sprinkling of whatever cheese of choice. And you talk about good. It will just change your life, Sydney. It's the best.
That sounds amazing.
But what I like to do is I like to kind of switch and rotate my squash crops. And the reason I do that is because later in the year, you can, you know, grow fall squash. You can grow a whole nother growing of yellow squash or zucchini, just simply from ripping those up out of the ground and planting the new. A lot of people this time of year too are thinking that a lot of their stuff is dying, and it really is just tired from the summer heat. That may be a good opportunity to kind of rip that up and replant like we just stated. Let's walk out here to my big garden too. How much longer do we have?
We're at about 20 minutes right now. While you're walking to your garden, you go ahead and
We got
I'm going to monologue a little bit.
We got plenty of time.
Your garden. If you're just joining us, this is Wreck and Create.
Yeah, let's do.
This is with the Bitter Socialite Trace Barnett. He's giving us rapid fire gardening tips. I'm like inundated. And I've got a couple more questions in the Facebook that we'll ask you in a bit, Trace. But if you want one-on-one canning and preservation class with Trace Barnett,
sounds good.
Sign up in the link. It's dropped in the comments. We'll show it to you at the end. You can sign up for our canning class July 28th at 6 p.m. Get a glass of wine, get some blueberries. We'll send you all the rest of the stuff that you need, and Trace will show you how to make this lovely blueberry jam. We'll can and pickle a a vegetable of your choice, do all kind of fun stuff. And so now I'll pull it back. Okay, one quick question, and then I'll pull it back to Trace. The question is, I have established cannas at a house I'm renting. I want to take some with me when I move. Can I save a seed, or should I discreetly take a few plants?
Say that one more time. You cut out on the end.
No problem. If somebody has an established, she said canna, a plant at their rental house,
yeah,
can they save seed from them, or should she discreetly take a few plants?
Definitely don't save seeds on cannas. So they will, and I always say when your cannas bloom, I always cut off the blooms, because after they've kind of bloomed, they start to make these small seed pods, and the seed pods are completely infertile. They are one of the rhizome plants, so they grow on these like almost right on top of the ground. They are rhizomes, and they all grow together. Cannas are one of those things too that they will just prolifically grow. So just absolutely dig those up and transplant them in your garden. They're one of the easiest cannas to transplant, but definitely don't try doing the cannas by seed. Definitely pull up some rhizomes. And I would suggest when you do get the cannas to pull up a few different rhizomes and, you know, spread those out, because in one season they're going to completely grow for you. And they are sun tolerant, but they like a little bit of shade and some moisture too.
One more quick question. Where do you buy your trellis for your vegetable beds?
So the trellis that you saw on my vegetable bed is actually, so do you know when you go and shop in a department store and they have or any kind of store, and they have the racks that are on the walls that you can kind of hang all of those things from? Yeah. That is what that is. And so I usually tend to go for a more industrial kind of trellis, especially like in my garden beds, because you don't want those to kind of deteriorate. I've had that problem before, especially with green beans and stuff. Is I really love my trellis to be there. We have a loud little motorcycle going by, but definitely like splurge a little bit. I think I paid, I think you can buy those for like, I don't know, $15, I think, but they'll be with you forever. And they're great because you can even like adhere them to the wall. So the bamboo trellis that I'm doing behind the tree, so that's just going to be cut bamboo. And then I'm just going to try and weave it together a little bit and kind of stick it to the wall that way. There's a million ways that you can trellis. I mean, I even used, Carol and Kevin cut down their crepe myrtles earlier in the spring. And I even made like the trellis for my loofah and stuff. I completely made it out of the branches. And I even did the trellis that's in my garden. I took some rebar, again, something that's not going to rot away on you. It kind of gives you that sturdy frame. And then I just wove those branches through that to kind of give it that cottagey garden kind of feel to it. But trellises is one of those things where you can really put your own stamp on it. If you can hear me, we're out here in this is where the big garden stuff happens. And again, this is not even a big garden in relation to a lot of size. I mean, if you have, you know, a small plot that you could take a small tiller. So you'll have to overlook some of the weeds in this garden. It has rained here every day for like 2 months, so I haven't been able to get Tilly the tiller, to run through that. But if you have an at-home tiller, simply take it. The first thing I tell everyone when you're trying to grow anything, especially that in a raised bed that you bring topsoil into, or even a garden that you're like freestanding out there, is always have a soil test, and soil tests are completely free from your county extension agent. I always recommend that because that's going to tell you all the amendments that you need to make to your soil, and that you really need that good foundation to that. This is the first year that I have done a vegetable garden back here in quite some time. I kind of rotate where I do my gardens, and this is definitely where it's going to stay from now on. So I've amended my soil again, and depending on the type of plants that you're planting, always do a little research, because like peas are real nitrogen heavy. Of course, squash, tomatoes, they love a calcium, so like bone meal. And I grow the peas, the okra, the corn. I have a row of squash here, which ends in a row of zucchini. And I grow all of this out here simply because it just seems to overflow. So like the pea plants are gorgeous. Definitely, if you have containers in the sun and you want to plant a pea plant in there, plant you some peas, thin those out, because as you can see, the plants have these beautiful little blooms on them, and they just kind of fall over. But I really like the space and kind of the road garden effect on these larger kind of type of crops. Now, okra over here, the okra is just coming in, and I don't know if you are familiar with okra, Sydney, but come in and look at that
Love okra.
bloom right there, Carol. Isn't the okra bloom gorgeous? So okra's in the
Wow.
mallow family. And they have these wonderful, beautiful flowers. And a lot of people, okra is one of those things, depending on the size of your family. There's only one of me, and I have a host of friends, but I don't know why I have 2 rows of okra. A couple of okra plants would completely feed you and your family for the summer. It's one of those things that you almost have to pick every single day. And have you ever picked okra before, Sydney?
I have. I used to. My grandma
Well,
used
as you know, it can be.
like this.
And you probably remember that the okra probably like kind of, made your arm itch and tingle a little bit. It stings somewhat. And I don't
Yeah.
know why, but fire ants love okra pods. So when I pick okra, my technique is, do you know those big white, like tube socks that people wear? Like they're almost like tidy whities, but they're those big white socks.
Yeah.
Get a get a set of those. And what I do is I'll pull them all the way up here to my forearm, get the extra long ones. And what we'll do is just put those on your hands, and it will be a shield for your forearms. You're not going to tear your arms up getting your okra, and you can just harvest without having to worry about the fire ants too. There's a bunch of different okra varieties to choose from, and I love the purple ones too. And we'll definitely, in our canning class, we will definitely be talking about doing some pickled okra, because that's absolutely my favorite. Whether you're making a Bloody Mary, if you are just pickling it to eat as a side dish, and it's so easy too. And when the point you were making earlier is, we'll definitely be making a jam, so we could do like a blackberry jam and a blueberry jam. You just need 7 cups of berries, so your berry of choice will be perfect. But once you basically know the fundamentals of canning and preserving, they kind of all hand in hand go together on preserving whatever it is that you may have growing in your garden. And my corn's just started to grow in here. One thing that is so interesting, we'll talk about in the canning class too, is how canning and preserving is all about utilizing everything that you have on hand.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. Have you ever had corncob jelly?
No.
So corncob jelly is, and it's another one of the Appalachian things we were talking about. So corncob jelly is where you actually take, use your corn, preserve it, whether you're making a creamed corn or whole kernel corn, or save the cobs, because they are completely loaded with starch and sugar. So they already naturally have this kind of sweet taste to them. And what they do is all of that sugar also lends itself to be a really good pectin. But corncob jelly tastes almost just like apple jelly. It's very light, very sweet, and depending on the type of corn that you have. So a lot of field corn has red cobs on it, and a lot of those red cobs will even tint your jelly red. Of course, if you want your jam, a different tint, you would have to switch your amount of corn. But the corncob jelly is so cool, and we'll talk about that too in our canning class. Let's walk up and say hello to the chickens too before we go.
Yes. I've had kudzu jelly before, but I've never had corncob jelly.
And And
So,
kudzu jelly, so funny about that is kudzu is completely edible, even down to the root. There's actually a recipe that you can make. You take tempura, like a tempura like batter, and you take the leaves and flip it in that tempura batter and lightly fry it, and it's actually very good. It sounds strange because you think of like a kudzu leaf as like this velvety tough thing, but with that tempura batter, it's really good. But kudzu jelly is great. And I also do a kudzu simple syrup where, 1 cup of water, 1 cup of sugar, but you add that into a mason jar with the kudzu flowers. And what it does is it kind of pulls all of that floral essence into your simple syrup, and you can make a spritzer out. We always look for every reason to drink at this house or kind of come up with a new cocktail. So, kudzu blooms work, right?
yes. And what you said, using every part of the plant in canning and preservation, I've been really interested in this as an art, particularly since the pandemic started, when everyone was going out, buying stuff, trying to go to the store, worried about their power going out. I was like, Southerners are already prepared. We already have, well, maybe not me, but like some people have shelves full of canned goods. And I was kind of interested in the way that people are maybe rediscovering this kind of stuff that they wouldn't have known of before because of the way things are now.
Oh, 100%. And I can, I will say that, there are good things that come out of a pandemic. And I think if there is one good thing that came out of this is I've had so many questions and, comments and wonderful, everyone I know is gardening, even people who have never planted a plant have decided to start gardening or actually canning and preserving. And that's another thing is you don't have to be a canner, a gardener to can or have this huge farm either. I mean, all of the farmer markets are just completely bursting. And I think more so than ever, people actually have an interest in where their food comes from. And I always joke that mine is definitely not like farm to table. It's more like porch to table.
Love it.
I think porch to table seems a little bit more, realistic. I'm going to show you this. So this is my garden in fail because, we always have one. I don't care if you've gardened every year for 100 years or if you just started. So this is my little bean teepee here. Me and my dad built this out of just some saplings that had gotten blown over in a storm. So naturally, I usually do like a big green bean arch, but I used all of my arch to build a fence. So we did this wonderful teepee. So my vision was to have all of these wonderful green beans climbing over it, but bought the wrong kind of green beans. So we bought bush beans. So you kind of have to dig around in there because, while they were growing on the trellis, you would be able to just pick them off. But the good alternative to my mistake is I don't think I have ever picked as many green beans as I have off of these bush beans. It is every day I'm out here picking away on these green beans.
Wow.
Come here and say hello to the chickens. And real quick too, I'm running away from you. Real quick, so we were talking about how people used to can everything. And so I actually have a recipe. It was from my great-grandmother. And they canned sausage, which I thought was so interesting because you really don't hear a whole lot about canned meats. But what they would do is they would, in a sense, just scramble their fresh sausage because, you killed a hog once a year. And you would can your sausage hot in your sterilized jars. And of course, it would create that vacuum seal. But there would be grease that would rise inside the jar and kind of just float on top. And apparently that's like heaven on earth, like to take that and season other things with. So the world of canning is completely anything you want it to be. I'm going to throw them over some food. They're hot and also full already. Chickens never stop eating. This is the new rooster. So he was my pick of the crop. His name is Cleo. He started out as Cleopatra, but he clearly was not a hen. So he's the new rooster, Big Poppy. Big Poppy is retired, and he is over in his little side place over there right now because if he were in here, he lives inside this garden that we're in now. But if he were in here with us, he would be attacking me the whole time because he has a vendetta against everyone. He would be attacking me, Carol, and everybody. And so I have red and white leghorns, and they vary in age. A lifespan of a chicken is about 7 years. And I had a lot of people interested in chicken keeping too, which we talk about in the book. And it's so easy to keep chickens. And a lot of people, they've changed the livestock ordinances in a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of cities, so you can actually have chickens. People always ask me, they're like, do you have to have a rooster to have eggs? No, you absolutely don't. Simply, you alternate their food. So I feed them organic laying pellets, high protein diet. Of course, they're like my natural kind of walking around built-in compost system.
Oh yeah.
So they really love all of the scraps, all the vegetable, cuttings and all of that. But you don't have to have a rooster at all. Simply have a few hens and you'll have more eggs than you want. Let's walk into my greenhouse real quick and then we'll call it a day. Is there any more questions?
One question is, are you afraid of snakes when harvesting in your large garden?
I am very leery of snakes. I have always been kind of the house I grew up in, we live out here in the country, so we always had copperheads, which, Alabama has copperheads, a host of other poisonous snakes, but I am fearful, and so that's why I wear these boots. So these are snake boots. They are made out of viper cloth, so, snakes cannot penetrate this, and I guess if I come in contact with one that hits higher than my knee, I guess I have bigger problems at hand. But I will say,
compliment on your outfit too.
Definitely boot up when you are, harvesting in your garden like that. And, you can always alternate if you are, in a snake prone area or scared of snakes, you can always alternate those rows where they are larger too. And then you don't have to worry about it. And, I've heard people who take mothballs and kind of sprinkle those around their garden too. I'm not a big mothball kind of smell person, so I have not done that to mine yet. Come on in my greenhouse. So this is the latest project that we've done. And the inspiration for this greenhouse was these old windows. I think they came from the old high school in Winfield years ago.
Oh, wow.
And they are like the leaded windows that you kind of crank out. And so they were the inspiration for my greenhouse here. And again, it's still a work in progress, so bear with me. We took old barn wood and kind of built out the frame to that. But you got to come see my favorite plant of all. As if I could narrow one down, this would be it. So this is Harry. He's my Australian tree fern. Almost grew a lisp when I said that. Can you believe this? Can you believe the size of this thing?
It's huge.
Yeah, he is slowly taking over my greenhouse. That being said, there is a point to being in the greenhouse. We'll back up because the service reception is not very good in there. You don't have to have a greenhouse, like we said earlier, to start seeds at all. You can easily start seeds like in a bright windowsill. Just make sure they get ample light. And there are actually complete kits. So if you really want to go into the canning gardening kind of homesteading, self-preservation thing, there are complete kits that you can buy now. I think Burpee has some of those. And what they are is they have grow lights, they have self-watering systems in them, and they're very compact, so they could work anywhere. You can even, take the cloches, put those over pots on your sunny deck after, frost and all of that, and it works well too.
Amazing.
Any more questions?
Can I really just go out in my backyard and grab a handful of kudzu and fry it? We've got a little bit of incredulousness that you can eat kudzu.
Oh, yes. What was the question again? Can you go out and just grab kudzu and eat it?
Is the question.
Yeah, you totally can. Though wouldn't recommend it because usually there's a lot of little critters that run around on those plants, and also too, when it's not cooked, I don't think it would have that wonderful taste too. When you put a tempura batter on something, or if you sweeten it up in a jelly, it tastes a little bit different.
You can batter and fry just about anything, I feel like.
Oh, you can totally batter and fry anything you wanted. Let's go sit down in my garden here. I'm about to have a heat stroke, I think.
Oh, no,
and then we might have a little bit better service because you're cutting in and out on me a little bit.
You're fine. We can wrap it up.
Let's walk in here and sit down.
This has been a chat with the Bitter Socialite Trace Barnett, who showed us his amazing gardens, beekeeping, all this amazing stuff. If you want to join us, July 28th, 6 p.m., the link is in the comments. Sign up for a canning and preservation class. We'll mail you a kit with everything that you need. All you got to do is pick up your produce, grab a glass of wine, join me and Trace.
Real quick though, in your canning kit, so they'll be getting like pint jars. And I know someone might be like, why is it a pint jar versus what size jar do you want to use? And, the sizes of jars completely vary, everything from like the small little, tiny little jelly jars all the way up to a jar that I could crawl in myself, which I like to do pickled eggs in those. We'll talk about pickling some eggs when we do that canning class. But a pint jar is my absolute favorite size to can anything in. I think it's a little bit easier to store. When I've canned, say tomatoes or squash or corn or, anything, all of the above, and I've put it, say, in like quart-sized jars or something like that, it always seems like I have a lot of residual leftover things from my jar. So I would rather have the opportunity to pop a pint jar open. If I need more, I can pop another jar open. And that way it kind of like rotates and keeps everything fresher too. Another thing about food preservation and why they should join us for our canning class is, I don't know if you're like me, but Alabama, we live in Tornado Alley here. So we always, our power goes out. And there's a debate on things, what you should can and what you should freeze. Because you could totally freeze any of the above that we just talked about, but it's better to can it because, I mean, if your freezer goes out, I mean, kaboom, there's your whole stash that you've worked so hard for.
Right.
And there's something about the canning, it's pretty, it looks beautiful on a shelf. And I really think that the flavor is just a little bit better when it comes out of a jar. And of course, it's so simple. So we'll definitely learn a lot in the canning class. And we'll talk about, what we're working on that day, take questions, and everything from pickled, like pickled eggs to, pickled chive blossoms. We'll talk about it all.
Ooh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was wonderful. And definitely join us for the canning class. It's going to be a fun one.
All right, y'all. I'm going to pop that link up on screen, and y'all have a great lunch break. I still don't have outro music, sorry. Boo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Boo!